What is the strangest thing you've witnessed someone do in public? Once saw a man standing next to an extremely expensive-looking home jump headfirst into a hedge, pull himself out, look at the hedge, and jump back in headfirst. He continued to do this for a while until someone nearby asked him if he were okay, to which he responded with, "Don't worry, this is my hedge, I'm just bored." Still to this day I respect his casual not giving a fuck vibe. He should have let someone else have a try instead of keeping it all for himself. I saw a dude with a suitcase, completely naked entering our train. His facial expressions were normal, he looked concerned and stared at his phone the entire time until I had to get out. Casual Fridays at the office is getting out of hand. Was this in San Francisco? There is, or at least used to be, a man who commutes to work in the financial district completely naked aside from a briefcase. I've seen him multiple times. Looked concerned. Probably wasn't sure if it was a dream or not. Standing in line in a store at the mall when I hear a weird sound from a woman's large tote bag, that is also slightly moving. Could swear I heard a quack? Couldn't be though. Except it was. She saw me looking at her bag confused, so opened it and showed me that she had half a dozen ducklings in there. She said she had errands to run and couldn't leave them in the car because of the heat. Made sense, but I think carrying around half a dozen baby ducks in a bag is pretty strange. That's a responsible owner, though. She a quackhead. This is adorable, though. Bahaha, I like that she dodged the deeper question of why do you have 6 ducklings? Woman in an immaculate business suit chasing a chicken down the street. I was stopped at a red light and there was a lady in the car next to me. She was having really sporadic head movements. Not the head bob dancing type, but just kinda crazy. After like 10 to 15 seconds of this her neck went limp and her head just hung forward. The light turned green and I hesitated a moment wondering if she needed medical care and was about to pull in front of her to check on her when her head abruptly jerked back up and she drove off without hesitation. Sounds like she was nodding out on opiates. Oh God, I'm a little afraid you might have run into my mom. She doesn't have seizures nor does she do drugs. She just read about this face and neck stretch and exercise routine somewhere on the internet that's supposed to stop you from developing wrinkles and sags, and now she does it in traffic and at red lights. It looks pretty wild. I'm terrified that someone's gonna call the cops on her one day. In her defense, she does look a ton younger than her age. I saw a woman on the GO train pull out an entire raw white onion from her purse then proceed to eat it like an apple as if it were nothing. She was tearing up and didn't seem to be enjoying it much. That's how painful a GO train ride is, you wouldn't mind eating a raw onion. She must have really liked that book, Holes. Once saw a man unicycling through a mall parking lot with groceries bags in each hand. During a snowstorm. No one ever believes me. They don't believe me when I first tell them and assume I said bicycle. They really don't believe me when I correct them and say, no. Unicycle, 1 wheel. I wouldn't have bothered telling you this if there had been 2 wheels. I unicycle to the grocery store all the time and have done it during some light snow. I use a backpack rather than carrying things in my hands though. The uni I went to had a circus group, the only one I've ever heard of where I live. A couple of the guys went round on unicycles as their normal mode of transport. Pretty impressive. On a high school field trip we went to DC and a man was staring at the school bus while jerking off. It's always nice to visit your congressional representative when you're in DC. Don't worry, that's just my uncle. At Bonnaroo I saw a guy with his pants down, dick out, jerking off and staring at Paul McCartney's end of show fireworks. Then he was showing his dick to some girls and a guy came up and punched him in the back of head, where he then started to hump the ground for a few seconds, then remain motionless, then hump the ground again. Security came and picked him up then. That was wild to watch. Why would you watch that? Bonnaroo 04. This guy was walking in front of me when we passed the security guards on horseback and just stopped and stared at the horse for a minute and with a very serious look, said, "That's a really, really big dog." Right in front of my house, a couple of guys stopped their car, left it in the middle of the street, and began a fistfight. Then after a couple of minutes of each of them throwing more or less ineffectual punches, they both stopped and got back in the car and drove away. It's that last part that makes it so strange. If an argument had proceeded to blows, then I wouldn't just get back in the car with the other guy as if nothing ever happened. Isn't the whole point of a fistfight between friends to resolve the issue? Like you get mad, so you punch each other until you're not mad and soon after you laugh about it and apologize. Not a healthy dynamic, but that's happened for me. I watched a woman walk into Chipotle, wash her hands for a solid 5 minutes under the Sprite in the soda fountain, and then fill up a trash bag fully with the Sprite and walk out with it. If I was working there, I'd have just stood there and watched, because there's no way I'm interfering with whatever's going on. I was in a bathroom stall the other day when a little boy, maybe 6 to 7 years old, goes in the stall beside me. He sits on the toilet and starts humming some made-up tune. That was already a little funny but nothing uncommon. Then he starts aggressively humming louder and louder. It gets to the point where it's almost just shrieking, and then he suddenly stops because he's out of breath. 2 seconds later I hear a plop in the toilet and he then begins singing, "Hallelujah. Hallelujah. I just pooped in the toilet," and repeats this a few times. I was almost passing out from trying to hide my laughter. That is awesome. You heard a legendary song that summons forth the poop. I was on the bus heading to grad school one afternoon when this lady gets on the bus, her shirt covered in an uncown reddish-brown substance that was on her shirt and caked around her mouth and face. She finds a seat towards the back of the bus, across from where I was sitting, and pulls from a paper bag a half-eaten rotisserie chicken covered in what I thought looked like raspberry jelly. She then reaches into her pants and starts smearing what I can only assume to be her menstrual blood over the chicken, as she then proceeds to take bite from the chicken and lick her fingers clean. I'ma need you to go ahead and delete this. Thanks. Unknown reddish-brown substance. Oh no. Rotisserie chicken. Oh thank God. Menstrual blood. Never mind. That legit just made me sick to my stomach. An old dude put down his suitcase and started doing a weird interpretive dance. The worst part is that this was in a crowd of hundreds of people and he was staring me down specifically with a creepy smile. I was a couple hundred feet away, and when I looked back there he was smiling. Dancing. Eyes locked into me. I can just imagine him with his fingers fanned out behind his back, hop-stepping and jumping near and far like some exotic Elmo bird. Near, far, want some fuck? Years ago I used to work doors as a bouncer. Had one bloke walk up the road towards me well into his cups, one step sideways for every step forward, you know what I mean, spot the pub, spot me, and do the old straight arm march that every bloke does when they are trying to hide their intox level. Marches up to a hand's breadth away from me, stares over my shoulder at the door. "Evening, sir," I say. No response. "Not tonight, sir," I say. He finally looks at me, slurs something like, "Why not?" I state the obvious. Ooh, he ain't happy with that. Goes on a full-minute tirade on how the world was against him, that every bouncer he's met tonight has been a cunt, and that I was knocking him back 'cause he was Corey Aboriginal, for you seppos readin'. As he's ranting, he's shrugging out of his clothes, and by the time he's done, he's stark bloody naked on one of the busiest streets in the city. He then holds a finger up, like a one-moment kinda gesture, then projectile vomits on his clothes whilst trying to maintain eye contact with me. Finishes, looks back at me, gives me the sup upwards nod, then strolls down the street stark naked. I like how you describe a Corey then say seppos as if we fucking knew what that meant, but not Corey. Lol. When I lived in Fresno, California, I lived next to a liquor store that tweakers sometimes hung out at. Outside the occasional meth head talking to imaginary friends, there was one guy that would walk around the parking lot collecting rocks. The best part was when he saw my Samoan friend and put his fist up and shouted, "Black Power." He was white, lol. When I lived in Fresno, California. That's all you need to say. The strangest 3 years of my life was living in Fresno. It's the only place I've ever lived in the US that I ran into a bunch of cops who didn't speak English. They were all Hmong. The Hmong are minority people out of Vietnam and Laos. Lots of them were displaced by the war, and came to the United States. Fresno has the highest concentration of Hmong after St. Paul, Minnesota. Watched a man dip his Rolex watch in a glass of grape juice. He then proceeded to suck the juice off the watch, piss in the cup, and redip the watch. He was humming the chorus of "Staying Alive" the entire time. I moved to a town which had a bit of a bad reputation. The first thing I saw when I was bringing boxes in was a man walking down the street with a bunch of plastic bags on fire. He was holding it like a lantern and was so casual about it despite flaming plastic dripping onto him. Actually like the town though. It's got character. Caught a guy jerking it in a bookstore. To what? One day, I was heading back to my dorm after class and heard a noise up a tree. I looked up and saw this squirrel holding 3/4 of a very big hamburger. My college campus had its share of fat squirrels, appropriate because it was in Wisconsin, but I had never seen one with such a huge amount of food. I stopped in my tracks and just watched as this squirrel proceeded to scarf down the burger. A friend of mine that was leaving the dorm approached me and asked what was up. I just pointed up and we both stood there watching this squirrel devour this burger. It wasn't a person, but it was still one of the strangest things I've seen happen in public. Something like this: I was sitting at a picnic bench outside of my college apartment when a red-tailed hawk swooped into the little tree right next to me with a pretty big dead rabbit in its beak. Weird, because I was in the middle of town, and I honestly don't know where he would have gotten that rabbit from at the size it was. It starts tearing into it, and I'm just watching all amazed because it's so close, and I'd never gotten to see a hawk eat its kill before, when the super prim family of a super prim girl I knew walked up. The mom asked what I was looking at, and just as I took a breath to tell her, the hawk dropped a big chunk of guts from the rabbit, and it splattered on her shoe. I laughed, she didn't, the hawk didn't give a fug either way. Glorious. We saw a guy take a big McSteamy right on the beach. Lifeguards were screaming at him and the local police took him away. Leavin' sausage McBiscuits everywhere he went. Openly weeping while carrying a bagpipe while walking the streets of San Jose, California. I saw a guy mowing the middle of a busy street, no grass, at noon. Gotta wonder what he saw there, what color the sky was, and whether it was a happy place. A woman lift her skirt, squat and pee on the sidewalk in front of a bus stop. Middle of the day, high-end shopping center, busy intersection. I'm surprised I had to scroll this far down before I saw a public pissing story. Reversal: the best place for us as teens on a limited budget was to visit buffet restaurants and stuff as much pizza in our faces as we could. Our favorite place took a long time to clear tables, so we would just move tables after we got seconds. This one time, we finished our first plates, went to the buffet and went straight to the second table. An older couple sat down by our first table while we were getting our seconds. We finished, and as we walked by our first table, I grabbed some food off my original plate, munched on it, and looked at the lady. She was frozen in mid-cringe, horrified. Her eyes were massive. Her mouth was at an odd angle. And she just glared at me. It didn't strike me until after I left that she had no idea that was my plate and just assumed that I was a child monster living on the streets eating other people's slobbery leftovers. A young couple trying to transport a couch on Vancouver's SkyTrain late at night. Moving while broke is like that sometimes. Once went on a drunken walk alone. At one point while walking through a part of my suburb I heard a "hello" shouted from across the street. I look over and see what appears to be a man who is also walking around drunk. Well, he must have been even worse than me, because he proceeded to hug a nearby telephone pole and slowly slide down it until he was laying on the ground, still holding the pole. There was a man running down the sidewalk who stopped when he got close and yelled "strange fruit," and then farted into traffic, somehow not getting hit. He ran off down the street yelling about strange fruit. How does one fart into traffic? I'm genuinely curious. I wrestled in high school and was down about 20 pounds for a tournament. We were walking back to the hotel after weigh-ins and my pants kept falling down, as I forgot a belt. One of my buddy's dads asked me if I needed a belt, and I said sure, thinking it was a joke, or maybe he had an extra one in the hotel. He proceeds to take off his belt, give it to me, pulls a second belt out of his front pocket, and puts it on. No idea why he had two identical leather belts with him that day, but I appreciated it. Two identical leather belts. Why the hell didn't he just give you the one from his pocket? Pick up a crawdad out of the gutter on 6th Street in Austin and lick it. I have video. It's horrifying. Cool, a prehistoric bug covered in the city's drunken vomit, let's get a little tongue action going. Edit: when I lay down for my nap this had no upvotes. It was a few years ago, let me attempt to dig it up. I brought my kids to the ocean, long drive but we started early, and as the kids enjoyed the ocean for the first time a middle-aged woman wearing a uniform of some kind walked by carrying a large, about the size of a small suitcase, cardboard box. She stopped and stared at my kids. It was odd, so I said, "Excuse me, ma'am," and she wheeled on me and started shouting in some foreign language. I had no idea what she was saying but she sounded pissed. She was literally spitting as she yelled at me. My kids noticed and ran back onto the beach. Then she shook this big box at me and there was a dull thud as whatever was inside banged around. I dashed around her, grabbed my kids by their hands and jogged away from her. I looked back and she was still standing there. This was at a state park so there were no houses anywhere near there. Weird. I was going to the shopping center in a big city, school trip to see some movie, and in one village we have been passing through I saw someone trying to cut off a street lamp with a saw. A fucking hand saw. Also, I live in Poland so we joked that he wanted an outdoor lamp but didn't wanted to buy one. I was visiting Leicester, then I saw a drunk walk out of a pub, trousers by his ankles. Beer in hand, this guy looked around whilst peeing, hands free. That scarred me as a child. My neighbor walked into the middle of the street last week and started yelling "I'm not crazy" at no one in particular. Which I'm pretty sure did not help to establish the point. I was driving home from the grocery store and saw two guys standing at a bus stop. One had all his clothes off on the sidewalk while shaving his body. The other looked very uncomfortable. I don't think anyone believes me. Guy in a mall pulled down his pants, squatted, shit in a planter box, pulled his pants back up and walked off. I've worked downtown for 20 years, and have seen some shit. But two things come to mind. 1. A guy riding a unicycle down a busy city street, all while wearing a propeller beanie and juggling. I figured he must have been practicing a routine, or something. Still, the sheer randomness of it made my day. 2. A white-haired old man wearing a sparkly sequin jacket, fiddling with this massive, ancient silver boombox. The boombox started playing some funky disco music, and the dude hoisted the boombox up on his shoulder and just started strutting down the street in time with the beat. Motherfucker had his own theme music. A man standing in the middle of the road at 9 p.m., with his pants and underwear down around his ankles, yelling at everyone that passes. He stayed in the same spot for a good 10 minutes.